And now we're going to create our different types of maps, our bump maps, transparency map, and things like that. So the first thing we want to do is select our different layers, and I'm going to create a copy of every single one of them. Okay, so now we have one copy of each of our different layers. And one thing I want to do with our branches is get rid of that different, let's double click, and we're going to get rid of our layer style on there and just turn off our inner shadow. And we can see that that removes it, and we don't have that depth anymore, but we still have our original map. And we're just going to be using this specifically just for our clip map. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off all of our other layers so we can just take a look at this specific layer. And I want to pull up levels, so I'm going to hit Control L. And now what I'm going to do is grab our left slider bar and bring it all the way to the right. And I'm also going to do that just one more time just to make sure that we have all the color data out of there and it's just completely black. And this is going to be part of our clip map. Now we actually need to separate our clip map and break it up into different pieces with the different leaves and combine that together, since some things are overlapping and others aren't. Another thing we want to take a look at is to make sure that we don't have any holes inside of our branches, and it looks like we may. Okay, so it looks like that second level kind of threw it off just a little bit, and maybe not. So what I want to do is we want to even this out, because we don't want to have, of course, the way this looks, it needs to be entirely flat black. So go back, take a look at our layers, and I'm just going to shrink this back down to where we had it before so that we can see all of our other tools. We don't have to worry about that. Another way we could take care of this, and actually if we take a look we can see the layer style might still be on there. We could still see the little F next to it, but just to double check, make sure that's turned off. And now I'm going to use brightness and contrast. So we're going to go up to Image Adjustments, Brightness and Contrast, and reduce our contrast all the way to 0 and our brightness. So we have -100 and -100. And click OK. And now it looks like we have an entirely flat black surface. And we can of course do that again with our brightness and contrast just to make sure. And usually levels works, but sometimes we get some errors in there. Okay, so now we have our clip map. And I'm just going to turn this off right now. And I'm going to create a new group. I'm going to call it, actually we could just call this maps, because we're going to have a bunch of different types of maps. And we'll drag our clip map into that. And if you want to name these specifically, you can. I'm just going to be keeping with the default layers, because I know which ones they are. But if you need to name them, then by all means do so. And I'm just going to compress this right now. And now we're going to take a look at our first leaf copy that we have. We want to make sure that we just have the one on. We're just focusing on that. I'm going to also just turn off our whole group map. And we're going to do the same exact thing that we did before. We're going to have adjustments, brightness and contrast. We'll just use this one, bring it all the way down. And that looks like it took care of it. So I'm not really going to worry about going back. What we can also see is that we have two little pixels that were not removed from our original leaves. So we do see a little bit of specks here and there. But that'll be taken care of once we do this next step and finish off our clip maps. So we'll drag that new one into the map there. We'll select our other copy. We're going to do the exact same thing. Click OK and drag that into our maps. And now we can take a look at all of our different maps. And we can see our overall clip map. But we do need to make just a few adjustments. And the thing that we need to do is, since we're using the original layers that we had to create our clip map, we're at the same edge length. So if we take a look right here, just specifically, and we take a look at our edges, it's going to be the exact same as our color map. And that's going to be a problem because our clip map is going to go just a little bit beyond that because we have a little bit of anti-aliasing on all of our edges. And we can see that where we just have these gray areas where it's not just black. So that can be a problem, but it's actually a pretty quick and easy fix for that. And we're just going to do this for every single layer. I'm going to double click first on our branches. Actually, I want to make sure I deselect that area just so that does not interfere. And we're going to be using our inner glow. And we want to set our inner glow to white. And we can change our size and the choke on that. We want to make sure our choke is up fairly high. We're just going to adjust our size and bring that inward. And we can see that start to remove a lot of those different areas. We also want to make sure the opacity is up to 100%. And then we can click OK. We also want to make sure that this is back in the center where it was before, just for the time being. But what we're actually going to be doing is just dragging both leaf layers on top of this because, as you can see right now, we have a lot of interference over their different leaves. And we also want to make sure that we're not removing any too important areas. So we might need to actually bring that glow down just a tiny bit, so it's maybe not that thick, because that is very large. So we'll just bring down the pixel amount, just as long as we see a white edge around our certain areas. If we could just look at where our different layers are intersecting to tell that for sure. Otherwise, we could just go ahead and copy this background, paint that black, and then we can see exactly what that outline is going to look like if we turn off our different leaves and just take a look at our branch. So we can see that this is the area that we need to get rid of, is that anti-aliased area, and by reducing our clip map, which you'll see because we'll have a white background, we're bringing in that couple of pixels there. That'll help out quite a bit. And now we need to do the same thing to our other layers. So I'm just going to copy the layer style and paste it onto each one of these other leaves, and we can just pull all that up. And now we can see all of our different outlines and everything. So I'm going to reduce that and get rid of that black layer that we created. And what I also want to do is drag this and these different leaves on top. And we can see that we're still having this issue. And this also depends on which way you compile this. But what I'm actually going to do is just clear the layer style on our leaves right now. And we still have it on our branch. So what I'm going to do is just merge this down, and we're going to merge them all together. And now we can see that that effect is affecting everything, and we don't need to worry about isolating it. But once we get into other maps, we of course are going to have to isolate that just a little. So now we can adjust the overall clipping just by adjusting our inner glow. And we just want to get to the point where it looks good, and we're removing those outer edges. But we also want to take a look at our stems too and make sure we're not removing those at all. So 3 pixels, 2 or 3 pixels ought to do it in this case. And we also have a lot of, you can see a lot of weird edges and whatnot, but that won't really show up too much, and actually it's a lot more realistic that way. If you notice one thing down here, we have a very thin line right there, and before, of course, that was thicker. And that's what I was talking about before with making sure that we have thick enough lines, because in this case, we ended up reducing it almost to the point where this little section is almost missing. Okay, so now we have one of our maps, and this is going to be our overall clip map for the entire scene. And we can just use this to clip out the black area or whatever color is going to be in the background of our actual color map. And we can just save this out right now as our clip map. since it's done. And we could also do the same thing with our color map, and we could save this out. But one thing I want to do before I go ahead and save out our color map is I want to make sure our background, we don't, just in case the clipping isn't quite right in some areas, we don't want to have a white background showing up. So we can go ahead and replace that color. We could just use our background, and we don't want black, so I'm just going to use our color grabber and just select one of these green colors in here, and then we can paint that background that color. And that way we have a little more of a blend between everything. And since it's all going to get clipped out anyway for the most part, we don't really have to worry about that background color. And I've just opened up this color map separately that I saved because we can use this to create a bump map as well. Instead of actually going in and creating anything custom, what we can do is just desaturate this and use it as our bump. So we don't need to worry about hue. Turn down our saturation all the way. And now we can see that we have our lighter areas on the leaves are in the center. And it should be the other way around because we want those to sort of dip in. So I'm going to invert, Control I, and that way we get darker areas down the center. We're going to get some nice seams in there. We also want to adjust our levels, so we can just make our color a little more even. And you want to keep the branches in mind too. As we can see, our branches are very white in some areas. And if you want, you could go in and adjust that manually. But there's one other thing I'm going to do, and that is because of our texture resolution. And we can sometimes get some weird bump maps within view when we're using certain image maps. We can get some pixelation in there. What we want to make sure we're doing is just giving a little tiny bit of a Gaussian blur on this texture. And I'm just going to use a radius of around 2 should be fine, just so we don't have any pixelation and we have some very nice blending, because that's also going to throw off our specularity map as well, and the bump and the specularity map have a lot to do with each other. So we could just go ahead and save this out as our bump map, and then we'll go back and work on our other maps. So I'm going to go back into our history and delete those merges that we created so that we have our 3 image maps back. And I also want to make sure that I bring that branches back in the center, and I'm going to remove that inner glow. And we don't need to worry about having that inner glow on there at all for our specularity map. That's just something that has to do with our transparency and clipping it out. It's also known as an alpha map. So the next one we're working on is our specularity map. And what that is going to do is allow to have shininess and glossiness on our leaves. But we don't want that on the overall surface, so we need to separate our leaves from our branches. And this is one of the reasons why we kept those separate too, where we had our top leaves and our bottom leaves, is because we just want our leaves to have that specular value. And we can also use this map as a luminosity map, which I'll show you once we get into view. But what we want to do is select our leaves first, and we could do a couple of different things. In this case, I'm going to use our brightness and contrast and just increase our brightness. And we just want it sort of a gray, and that should be good. We're going to do the same thing with the bottom. Just increase our brightness and our contrast. And if you wanted, you could have some leaves shinier than others, a little bit of variation. I'm going to make these levels just a tiny bit different. We'll have the lower ones just a small amount brighter. But now what we can do is save this out, and we could use this as a luminosity map, or, like I said, as a specular map. And we're going to be using them both together. So I'll just go ahead and save this out, and then we can switch over to view and start applying these to our trees.